Adam West, Burt Ward, Frank Gorshin, Cesar Romero, Burgess Meredith, Lee Merriweather, you name it. Perhaps the most ambitious superhero film ever made, Batman 1966. It is at once a bold statement and utterly ridiculous to say that it's a great film, or is it? Obviously, not a high, huge special effects budget, and effects being what they were in 1966, accompanying the campy TV show that was already going on. It was inevitable that it was going to be a campy movie. They actually have a bit of a disclaimer at the beginning of this film that basically, and I'm not going to remember the quote, but says this is to have fun and enjoy having a fun time and not to be taken too seriously. They do all of the usual things that they did from the show, the placards that show up that say Bane and Pow, and the really, really outrageous riddles and jokes that have obviously the only answer is, and yet the answer is in no way, shape, or form logical or seems related to the riddle or the joke whatsoever. On the other hand, they do not hesitate. You talk about being ambitious, having all of the major villains appear in the story. Of course, having them work together makes it a little bit easier of a shtick to pull off. But to have that many different villains appear in a single storyline really heightens it and makes a bigger deal out of it. And especially as a bit of nostalgia. All the talk we hear today about nostalgia bait and reboots and continuation soft reboots, dragging in things just to pique the interest of nerds that appreciated the old. I would rather just go back and watch the old if I'm feeling nostalgic. I like to have the old characters brought back to things if it's done with honor and with dignity instead of trashing them the way too often happens in current cinema. You can't do anything better than the icing on the cake for Batman 1966 is to be able to see all those iconic characters together and played by those iconic people at that iconic time, to be able to have Burgess Meredith and Cesar Romero, Frank Gorshin, who doesn't get enough credit. Many of them, like Lee Merriweather, Frank Gorshin, appeared also on Star Trek, the original series, which weirdly was after this, that they appeared on Star Trek. Frank Gorshin was Commissioner Beals in the infamous episode, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. He played one of the aliens that are half black and half white. Great actor, and was around for quite a while and did a lot of parts like that. But having him as the Riddler, Lee Merriweather being there as Catwoman, what iconic people. You can't say enough about how absolutely pop culture iconic that is, especially for the time, and having them all together in a film. Now, the storyline of the film is excessively kind of ridiculous. On the other hand, it is very consistent with comic books at the time. While Marvel Comics was moving more in line of older audience or more mature stories, even from its inception in the 60s, nevertheless, with DC, there was still a lot of more, and it would go on for a while, of being aimed at kids. And yet the Batman movie, like the series, it's clearly meant to be campy. It's meant to be cartoonish and fun. It's as if they intended it to be part of that 60s weird pop culture thing. And yet it's so enjoyable. It's fun to watch, even though some of it is, some spots are cringe-worthy, to use the parlance of our times, that they'll deliver some really bad pun or some bad, and you just, oh my, really? But again, it was consistent with the comic book. The thing that was really outstanding about that campy Batman at the time it was a series and this movie in 66 is that it didn't shy away from being silly, but it did pay respect to, therefore, the comic book. Yes, this is not the super serious Batman whose parents were killed, that it could have been more gritty and serious from the beginning. It's not what we got later with the very dark Batman, which is no problem with that. But we do get the comic book Batman sort of unashamedly. What it really reminded me of watching this from '66 was the recent movie The Suicide Squad. The second one, obviously, not Suicide Squad, but The Suicide Squad. Because what The Suicide Squad did that is consistent with Batman 1966 is it wasn't afraid to be silly. While The Suicide Squad isn't nearly as campy as the 66 Batman or any of the 60s Batman, nevertheless, the way it opens, where we meet all these random characters, Ratcatcher 2 is called Ratcatcher 2, just like from the Who's Who comic book, the Polka Dot Man, even characters like Javelin are thrown in there. With that, it was like they were not at all ashamed to be silly and campy, but paying tribute to the actual comic book. They threw in all of these characters, the Weasel, throwing in these weird characters that the audience didn't need to know who they were to get the gag. But for me, nerds like me who got the gag and remembered those characters, it was like, that's cool. It felt like that watching Batman from 1966, having those famous characters, having those great actors and actresses playing in those roles and being able to revisit that. And it didn't take it too seriously, but it had fun, but it still told you a basic story with a moral of right and wrong, and was just great stuff, especially for its time. So right now I have YouTube Premium, and right now that's included with that. It is free, so I don't know if you don't have Premium, if there's commercials, or if you can see it. But Batman 1966, see it, love it. Let me know what you think below. I'm going to go get me a Batcopter and a Batmobile and a Batcycle and a Batboat and a Bat communicator and a Bat whatever.